We're live in Facebook. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants from all over the world. Welcome to this webinar. This webinar is on marine plastic pollution monitoring. This event is one of the several pre-congress event called Collapse. As we know together that ASEAN have a high commitment on one of the project like in ASEAN called ASEAN Norwegian Cooperation on Local Capacity Building Reducing Plastic Pollution in ASEAN region. This event try to highlight the lesson learned from this project and also from other efforts in Asia reduce plastic from going to the river into the ocean by providing example of approach to understanding tackling marine plastic pollution by knowledge sharing to find the science-based solution. Before we start, I would like to inform for the guidelines. If you have a question, the participant will submit the question through Q&A chat box, and based on the first come first serve. And then if there is an unanswered question, can send by email to the respected speakers. We will start this event by I would like to call for opening remarks from the ASEAN Secretariat, His Excellency Eka Pantavong, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for Socio-Cultural Community. Please, Excellency, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Chair the Thomas Peterson, Ambassador of Norway to ASEAN, Deputy Secretary General Amida Prak, and the Deputy Secretary General Lin Yin, National Council of Sustainable Development, Ministry of Environment of Cambodia, Dr. Hans Frederick Bryden, researcher the section for the catchment biogeochemistry, Norwegian Institute for Water Research, DIVA, Dr. Arisman, the Executive Director, Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Indonesia, representatives from ASEAN member states, Norway, partner organizations, research institutions, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and good afternoon to all. It is my pleasure to welcome all our distinguished participants to the ASEAN Node webinar on replicable models on marine plastic pollution monitoring. My appreciation goes to the partners in the environmental management for the seas of East Asia, PEMC Resources Facility, for the excellent arrangements made for the online convening of this webinar. My acknowledgement also goes to the government of Norway for its strong and continued support through the ASEAN, the Norwegian cooperation project on local capacity building for reducing the plastic pollution in ASEAN region, or the ASEAN Node project. Our seas and coasts are vital for our lives and livelihoods. The oceans, however, they are under the immense pressure and threats, especially due to the marine plastic pollution. Some recent studies suggest that the economic cost of marine debris, including to tourism, fishing, and shipping, is estimated at around 10.8 billion US dollars for the countries in the APEC region. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic further magnifies the existing threats of the plastics in our oceans. ASEAN has committed to strengthen the collective action to address this pressing issue. Under the leadership of Thailand, the Bangkok Declaration on combating marine debris in ASEAN region, along with the ASEAN framework of action on marine debris, was adopted in 2019 to reaffirm the region's pledge and the target to combat marine pollution. Subsequently, the ASEAN Regional Action Plan on combating the marine debris in ASEAN member states was launched in May 2021. There are priority initiatives being implemented to address marine debris in our region. These include the regional capacity center for clean seas hosted by Indonesia, and the regional knowledge center for the marine plastic debris initiated by Japan and managed by the area, and the sustainable development strategy for seas of East Asia, led by PIMSE, and ASEAN Node project. I hope that these initiatives will enhance regional research cooperation and knowledge networks, and to produce databases on marine debris monitoring. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of today's webinar on replicable models on the marine plastics pollution monitoring is aligned with the theme of the East Asian Seas Congress 2021, charting a new decade of the healthy oceans, peoples, and economies, or hope. It is also among the ASEAN's priorities outlined in the regional action plan, particularly under the research, innovation, and capacity building components. ASEAN recognizes that the issues associated with the plastic pollutions in the marine and riverine ecosystems are complex. We need to step up in the monitoring of marine and riverine plastic litter to enable us to assess the context of the problem and the possible impacts, and make informed decisions in developing the mitigation policies and measures, and later on to evaluate the effectiveness of such measures. The webinar today provides an excellent opportunity for us to exchange information and experiences in monitoring the methodologies, lessons learned, challenges, and opportunities. The webinar serves as a platform to share the results of the pilot activities in marine literature monitoring under the ASEAN Node project, particularly at the pilot sites in Indonesia and the Philippines. Furthermore, we will also learn from experiences beyond ASEAN, such as Hong Kong and Arafura and Timor Seas region. As there has been the ongoing global discourse on the potential global treaty on the plastic pollution, the webinar also provides an opportunity to exchange views on the essential elements and the implications related to marine debris monitoring in such a treaty. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this webinar therefore holds an important role in bringing in new insights and practical solutions, particularly towards the upcoming East Asian Seas Congress 2021. I look forward to productive discussions on how we can advance our knowledge and collaboration on marine debris monitoring. I trust that we can benefit from such exchange to improve our data collection and management to support a better policy making process. With shared vision and joint effort, we can continue to make waves and work together towards cleaner and healthier the oceans and coast. I wish this webinar a great success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency Eka Pantavong. And now I would like to call His Excellency Kjell Thomot Petersen. Please, Excellency, Ambassador Norway to ASEAN. Ambassador Petersen, please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Pantavong, dear participants, speakers, and colleagues. Let me start by thanking PEMC for organizing this workshop. I feel honored to be invited to provide some remarks. Ocean sustainability is an important priority in Norway's foreign policy and a key component in our cooperation with ASEAN. A look at the global map explains why. The ASEAN region is centrally located and populous, in addition to being a central pathway for global trade and maritime activity. We all know that our oceans and waterways are becoming increasingly polluted. Only shared efforts can achieve intended results. I'm therefore glad that PEMC has gathered so many experts to discuss monitoring models to identify ways to combat marine litter. Scientific work is meticulous and requires lots of fact-finding to establish a knowledge base for decision-making. The scope of plastic pollution is still very much unknown beyond what we observe through our own eyes. Accurate data on waste generation, leakage, and the future environment is to a large extent lacking. To model responsive measures and policies, we need to enhance our knowledge base for land and sea-based sources. Present global estimates for marine littering and pollutions are based on models differing in their approach, which might consequently impact the mitigating measures. The purpose of today's workshop is to contribute to improving the modeling by sharing our knowledge and best practice among scientists, practitioners, and policymakers. We share the same objective of clean, sustainable oceans. But how to achieve this is the complicated part. Modeling combined with monitoring are essential tools to identify and assess the effects of mitigating measures, including development of infrastructure and policy. Models help us to understand the present and to foresee the future. Harmonization and sharing of knowledge, transparency, and discussion approaches is therefore extremely important. In a few months, we may be moving forward with negotiations for a global treaty on plastic pollution. Joining forces is the only way forward to solve this growing challenge. I would like to encourage all participants to bring the best knowledge to the discussion and help advance the evidence base for practical approaches for monitoring plastic pollution. This workshop is another milestone in the ASEAN project. I wish to thank the ASEAN Secretariat, PEMC, Norwegian Institute for Water Research, and Center for Southeast Asian Studies for fruitful cooperation on the project. Finally, thank you for the opportunity to be present at the opening of this workshop today. I wish you all the best with your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for opening remarks. Now we move to the keynote presentation from Dr. Marianne Olsen. Dr. Marianne Olsen is a research director from Norwegian Institute for Water Research. Please, Dr. Marianne Olsen, the time is yours.
Thank you, Osman. Okay, thank you. I will share my screen and there, thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers and participants, I'm honored to contribute to this event by giving the keynote presentation on importance of monitoring plastic production throughout Southeast Asia. I am replacing my colleague, Dr. Hans Fredrik Weiteberg Bråten, who unfortunately has become sick. So my name is Marianne Olsen, and I'm Research Director at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, as Dr. Aresman just mentioned. In this presentation, I will address some of the aspects related to monitoring and touch upon the questions why, what, and how to monitor. Let's see. Research on plastic leakage and marine debris has developed significantly in the last few years, but our knowledge on the scope of the problem, environmental and societal effects, and potential solutions is still limited. And accurate data on plastic waste generation, sources and leakage to rivers and waterways, and total flux to the marine environment is lacking. As you see on in this graphic here, you can see this exponential growth in the number of publications. And you can also see that the majority of these publications are still addressing sources and distribution, while there is much less known and published on the harm to life and ecology, and then even less about the actual toxicology and the risk and the effects and how to solve this. So plastic is primarily produced and consumed on land. And if the resultant waste is not properly collected and managed, it is likely that the plastic waste will find its way into nearby rivers through surface runoff and other catchment processes, particularly during heavy rainfalls and flooding events. Rivers actually act as conveyor belts where the sea is the ultimate destination. To find the solutions to this, we need to not only focus on the endpoint of the journey of plastic litter astray, but also pay attention to what is happening upstreams and to understand the causes, the sources, and the transport routes. We have all seen and heard estimates and statements about the magnitude of the problem. These figures and statements that are presented to you here are all based on estimates, though for many of us it is less known how these estimates are developed, and we may not even question them. Behind these estimates on global riverine discharges to plastics or of plastics to the oceans are models that rely on highly variable data that contain large uncertainties. Modeling studies utilize an array of different data sources to produce estimates. And the reason for why some of these estimates are or the reason for why there are large discrepancies between studies relate to the difference in methods and in models. And there is a lack of field data for testing the model assumptions. I will show you later how these estimates can vary quite a lot. But we do know that most of the plastic actually reaching the ocean originates from rather few major rivers. What will help us in finding solution is the fact that actually 80% of all plastic produced is still landlocked, which means that we have to think of mitigation actions that are actually addressing the sources on land. And I would state that this is actually more tangible than when plastic is actually have already reached the ocean. In Southeast Asia, we find many of these rivers where there are large populations, there are large rivers, and waste management is lacking or is not sufficient. In efforts to reduce plastic leakage from countries that contribute the most, we will have to address these problems. And to be able to suggest and implement adequate reduction measures, including development of infrastructure and prioritization of policies, and to assess the effects of mitigation measures, accurate estimates of plastic leakage and their sources is fundamental. The ASEAN-Norwegian Cooperation Project on local capacity building for reducing plastic pollution in the ASEAN region, known as ASEANO, strengthens the knowledge, the capacity, and the awareness to tackle plastic pollution from key sources in the ASEAN region through a strong network and close interactions with the industries and businesses, governmental bodies, and other stakeholders, and other projects, as well as NGOs. Within the ASEANO project, there is a catchment approach, meaning that we address the entire transport route from the sources to the plastic reaches the rivers. Reaches the oceans. So what do we need from the monitoring? Well, what we have done and what we know about facts facts we have around plastic pollution has mainly been focused on the microplastics. There is some both on transport and abundance, some on marine biota, and quite a lot of service and activities has been focused along the sea, the coast, some also in estuaries. What is less known is rivers, the transport routes, the fluxes that the rivers bring, and the amount, the load of plastic brought with rivers. What is also lacking is standardized methods for sampling, for reporting, and also for actually doing models. I will come back to now these differences that we will find between different models. Here are some examples. And earlier I referred to a study from 2015, which is very well known to many, Jenne Jambek from 2015, which is the C column here. And as you see, there are also other studies that have estimated plastic discharges, and they differ quite a lot. And as I have said, some of the reason for why these very differing estimates is that there are, of course, different approaches. The models are built and depend on different parameters. Different factors are given various importance, but it is also here important to say that there is a lack of verification. So there is a lack of monitoring data that can verify these models. So monitoring can provide us with more accurate modeling. And we also need the harmonization. Here is an example of various sizes that has been reported and the size categories that has been used in different studies when it comes to to classifying plastics as either nanoparticles, microparticles, meso, or macro. And as you see, different studies use different classifications. And even though there are reports and guidelines that are developed to support this, and maybe the most closest to what we can call a standard is the report from GESAMP number 99, the working group on the UNEP, we still don't have actually a standard for this. So as you see, there is a need to sort of agree upon how to use different terminology and how to use different classifications of particles. And when comparing studies, and this is the basis, these differences, it is extremely difficult to actually come up with a full understanding of how different studies can be compared and what is the actual situation. And this also then is a problem when we want to see differences between geographical sites, but also in time, comparing different studies in time, and also if you want to see changes and developments. So understanding the plastic problems means that we have to sort of have a full overview. We need to know something about the sources. We need to know how macro turns into micro. We need to follow the discharges, the transport and the distribution. We need the monitoring to understand the present, but we also need to understand the future. And this is where the models can support the monitoring, and where the monitoring can support the modeling. We need to understand uptake and effects and bring this into environmental risk assessment, and also understand the impact of the plastic pollution, not only to the environment, but also to the society. And out of this, we can develop policy and regulations. We can kick off mitigation. And to support all this, we need guidelines, we need policy, we need regulations. So to summarize this, for the modeling and the monitoring, we have different purposes, but what monitoring can provide us is an understanding of the contamination, the situation, and how it develops in time and space. Monitoring can also provide us understanding of the impacts, the effects, and the risk. And as I said earlier, monitoring supports modeling, and modeling supports the monitoring. So with these words, I'm looking forward to the speakers, the presentations today, and to get an overview and understanding of where we are, what interesting projects are running, what knowledge we have, and together we can look into the future. Thank you and good luck with the collab.
Thank you, Dr. Marian Olsen, for keynote presentation. Now we move to the local case study presentation. We would like to start with the first speaker, Dr. Hidayat from Indonesia. He will present quantification of plastic litter transport from Citarum River. Dr. Hidayat, please, the time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Arisman. Dear Excellencies, distinguished speaker and participants, today I will present the results of the ASEAN project. Let me put it on slideshow. Yes, this about quantification of plastic litter transport from River Citarum, Indonesia. The plastic pollution in the Citarum River, it is the river that once named the most polluted river on Earth, and currently on restoration effort to improve water quality and reduce riverine plastic litter transport, as well as subsequent marine plastic litter pollution, so-called the project, the Citarum Harum. Restoration and mitigation efforts require baseline value on composition and volume of riverine plastic litter. This is the location of our study area. This is the Citarum catchment, just or the border with the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta. So it's quite important catchment. It's the ASEAN project, which is the ASEAN-Norway Cooperation Project on local capacity building for reducing plastic pollution in the ASEAN region. The objective was to quantify the seasonal deposition and remobilization of litter along the river shoreline and river bank, and quantify the flux of plastic litter from the Citarum to the sea. The first one is riverbank zone dynamics. So we sample at the riverbank zone. We use 30 by 30 by 10 centimeter square cubic centimeter monoliths, just like this. So we took samples. All material was disaggregated thoroughly to separate out all the consistent pieces, and we weigh the non-plastic fraction and estimate composition, and we put plastic into categories and count and weigh and record the data. The result is like this. We take the sample and analyze it. This is the results of the riverbank plastic contamination. Is in one location, just the natural bank. We found less organics, and plastics is quite high. The largest plastic proportion was 2.85% of the total monolith weight. So you can imagine that with the proportion, with all the sediments and these quite large amounts of plastic contamination. And if compare also with the location where the location was the plantation area, we have more organic, but still we have plastic pollution. And plastic litter flood monitoring by FishNet, we did it in the next to the bridge. So we put the FishNet like this, and the location is at the same river, in the Citarum River, and we set up the trash boom setup like this. The FishNet is put just half of the river, because we still have used the river for transportation, so we cannot cover the whole river. And we put the weights, the anchor to make it stable, and we collect the debris like this. So then using the tools, the FishNet, we took the sample to be counted and weighted. And this is the step for river quantification. So we took the sample from the nets, and then we put it on the box as a standard. And then also this is we dry the samples and then sort it and weight it. So the monitoring progress in 2021. So we have covered the whole season. The first one is in March, in rainy season here, and still rainy season in April, but weaker, and then a bit stronger in May, and then during the dry season in July, and September is transitional season, and again the rainy season in October. So this is the results. It's interesting that we have this pattern. In March, we still have the pattern like this because of the rainfall is already stable. But in May, we have high fluctuation of rainfall, so also high fluctuation of litter that we capture in April. This is similar to a condition in March, and in July during the dry season is almost constant low sample, and in October we have again high sample of debris. And then this is the composition. So in March, in almost all the months, organics is the most fraction of the sample. And then we see that also plastics is quite consistent, is higher than 10%, except for October. And also we found hazardous materials, because this is mostly diapers that throw away to the river. So we see that the increase of people use of these single-use materials is have to be followed by the culture that they have to manage the waste. And the composition without natural organics, we see that we still have other organics, just like wood for construction materials. And still, we see plastic have high composition here. So also the hazardous materials, it's mostly diapers. And also we found textiles also very high in July. And this is also found ceramics, something like that for the materials for building. And also we use the visual counting method, where we divide cross-section into sections. So this is on the same bridge. We cover the whole bridge section. So this is also complementary with the monitoring using the net. So just because this can easily cover the whole section, and the observers stand on the bridge and manually count lifted floating plastics. And this is the result. This is similar to those resulted from FishNet observation. In March, we have high concentration of plastic litter flux. And in April, this is lower, and in May, it's really high because of the fluctuation also in the rain condition. And in July, during the dry season, we have lower, and in September, transitional, it's getting high, and getting higher in October at the start of the rainy season. And this also, we see the composition without natural organics. So most of the litter food wrapping is very high composition. Also found plastic bags, it's quite large proportion. And also we use visual counting for the plastic identification. Just we train the observer to classify what is the polymer types. Yes. We see that polystyrene is quite high proportion, because they also get cramped during the transport to the, along the river, so they become so many of them. And also PVC, found PVC type, and also PET is also still very high composition. And interestingly, in October, we have the high increase of LDPE transport in the river. And also we use the method by using UAV or drone for the monitoring. We use three heights for the observation, and this is the fly path at the same river, and we see that we use the image labeling for the identification, and we compare it with visual counting. This still follow the trend of the plastic transport in the river, and we still this one is still in progress and also promising to be used later on. And this is the remark that the ASEAN riverine plastic monitoring have been conducted in the Citarum River in Indonesia. It's covering the rainy, the dry, and transitional season. And during normal or rainy season, we found normal debris, and at the heavy rain after dry days, we have more debris. And that's also interesting that we have to see the detailed information on the distribution of rain along the river, and thus the water level of the river. And also we found that it's also have effect from the tide, and so the interaction between tide and river discharge also important on the litter transport. That's from me. Thank you, Pak Arisman.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hidayat. I forget to remind all speakers because we have a limit of time. We hope that all speakers spend 15 minutes for presentation. And also for the participant, don't forget to write down your question in the chat box, either in the Zoom or in the YouTube. I would like to move to the next speakers, Mr. Gary Stoke, from Operation Director of Ocean Asia. Please, Gary, the time is yours.
Okay, Your Excellencies and distinguished speakers, and obviously all the participants, thank you very much for having me. Yes, such an important topic, especially in the Asia region. So with Oceans Asia, we're basically, we do a lot of investigations, whether that's into the shark fin industry or others. We also obviously have been working a lot on marine debris and plastics. And obviously with COVID-19, we've all been kind of restricted to how far we can travel. And one of the main things that we've been focusing on was obviously the debris from COVID. From COVID-19, we were the first to start noticing all the debris on the beaches with the face masks. So we're based in Hong Kong. If we can just get the next slide up, and I'm sure many people know, back one, back, there we go. Many of our beaches and coastlines look very similar to this. And I know it's not just a Hong Kong or China region, it's obviously around the region. And when we go onto the beaches, what we're trying to do, we've developed a program called Ocean CSI. And that's to basically try to teach people to start looking at and investigating the source of the trash and actually the debris that they're seeing on the beach. I mean, it's one thing to look at that beach and say, oh my God, it's terrible, it's covered in trash. But to start analyzing it, questioning where are these, you know, where is this debris coming from? What is its consistency? And how can we turn it off? Do you grab? It's great. We're doing all these beach cleanups. I think it's fantastic. It gets people out there in the natural environment to actually see what's happening. But we need to turn the tap off. So when we look at the beaches here, you know, obviously it depends on currents and location. If we're at the entrance to a river, for example, we are going to see a lot more household debris. But when I go out along the coastlines of Hong Kong, the rocky, you know, areas that are actually way off the beaten path, we have beaches where the government will actually clean up. They are gazetted beaches. Then we have beaches that, you know, obviously a little bit more harder to get to. Then we have these remote locations. One was the Soko Islands, which is where we found all those masks that I was holding up on a string. But it's only when you actually really start looking at the debris that I started sort of ringing the alarm bells. Now, I was involved with the movie Seaspiracy, and one of the claims in the movie, and obviously people take the movie however they like to see it, but one of the claims was, you know, 50% of the debris was coming from the fishing industry. And a lot of people have contested that, obviously. That was based on a survey by Boy and Slat in the middle of the Pacific. And a lot of people were playing it down and saying it's a lot less. Well, let's have a look at some of these beaches. So if we can go to the next slide. One of the things that I'm noticing is there is literally all this fishing debris. If we can just go to the next slide. What we've started to do, next slide. What we've started to do is obviously categorize what is fishing debris. Slow down, back. So we have the fishing nets that we're obviously finding, ghost nets that are washing up all over the beach. And you know, obviously these are constant killers. They are made of plastic and they are constantly going to be killing. That's what they're designed to do. And around the coastlines of Hong Kong, and I know around the rest of the world, we just keep finding tons and tons of these nets that are just dumped or abandoned, or they're caught. So obviously ghost nets, fishing gear is one. Next slide. Now we've picked out 7 items that we constantly find. Another one, I'm sure if you go down the beach, you see all these baskets, and these baskets are used, they're fish trays, but they're also used for the fish. Next slide. And we often see lots of these fuel cans, oil cans. This is for heavy marine oil, you know, obviously used by all vessels, not necessarily only fishing vessels, but you don't really get pleasure vessels using these sort of things. It tends to be more commercial vessels. So next slide. And fishing floats. So we get lots of these plastic fishing floats, which are obviously, they're going to stay around for a very, very long time. If we go to the next one, and we've also got, hopefully, that's the next one. We also have polystyrene fishing floats. These are the cheaper versions, but we find these literally on every single beach. And next slide. The polystyrene fish boxes. Now, these are literally covering all of our beaches along the coastlines of Hong Kong. They are in all various forms of degradation, from the full box to the snow-like substance that's left when they break down. Next slide. And I added in this one plastic bottles. The reason why is obviously plastic bottles could be coming from any source. But one thing that I'll show on the next slide, these plastic bottles, if you look at these ones up in the top left especially, so when we go and we look for any of those 7 items, it's literally like the smoking gun. It's indisputable. The polystyrene boxes are coming from the fishing boats. They're stacked up on all the vessels in the harbors. And, you know, the fishing floats, the fishing boxes are, you know, they're great. They're cheap. They're lightweight. They've got thermal properties that are fantastic. It's a great box, except for the fact that they are so cheap and they are so flimsy. They break and they just get thrown overboard or they get blown off the boat. Same with all the other fishing gear here. But the interesting one in the middle there at the bottom is the plastic bottles. Now, these were plastic bottles found in Galapagos. And if you notice the one on the left there, that was the one that we keep finding all over the beaches of Hong Kong. And this was when there was a large fleet, fishing fleet from Asia, just around the Galapagos. So these plastic bottles are being carried and obviously on these fishing boats and dumped. So what we've been doing, if we go to the next slide, is we've been going to various, I would loosely term beaches, coastal areas. And this is just one small area. And what we do is we've been using our drone and we get some high resolution shots. And then this area here is only 180 meters squared. It's 10 by 18. But what we do is, if you can go to the next slide, is we zoom in and we literally start what we call, if we can go to the next slide, we start putting these dots on all the items. So we zoom literally right in to an itemized level, and we started to put the dots on all of these items. And the thing was, when we look at this area of trash, by putting just those 7 items, selecting those, if we can go to the next slide, when we look at those 7 items, if we were to remove those 7 items, apart from the organics, the pieces of wood and things on there, there was pretty much nothing left. You know, I mean, that actually looks, my partner actually says it's quite a beautiful image, but not when you really know what it is. So what we've been doing is we've been going around various coastlines and areas. If we go to the next slide, we've got another example, and you'll see what I mean about the polystyrene. This is very, very common in Hong Kong. It looks like a winter wonderland, but sadly it's all polystyrene that's been breaking down and breaking down and breaking down. And yeah, this area is 14 meters by 38. And if we go to the next slide, same thing. We went through, we started doing all the dots. Now, interesting to see the different compositions of different areas. And that's dependent on currents and obviously wind flows. This beach, for example, is facing east and directly away about 4 miles, 5 miles across the shore, the waters there, is the fishing harbor of Aberdeen, where all those fishing boats are coming out with these boxes. So if we turn it off, turn the next slide, please. If we turn the picture off, you can see that pretty much the entire beach was plastic bottles and polystyrene boxes. We've got a few oil cans in there and everything, you know, a few of the fishing floats, but pretty much it was predominantly just this polystyrene. So, you know, what we're looking at doing is trying to visually show, you know, the impact of the fishing industry and what it's having on our marine debris that we're finding on our coastlines. So if we just go to the next slide, and I think we're pretty much there. So we are actually looking for people around the region, because we can't travel, to get some other areas of beaches where we can, you know, then obviously start running these processes, and so we can get a comparison around the region. Next slide, I think it was the last one. So yeah, we are just looking for some collaborators and everything. If they have any drone imagery, they would love to share. But that's pretty much what we've been up to. And you know, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Gary, for making it on time. Now we move to the next speaker, Dr. Sun Wook Hong, from founder and president of our Sea of East Asian Network, ASEAN. Please, Dr. Sun Wook, the time is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, clear.
Okay. So please share, control my slides. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be a part of this gathering to share our wisdom and tactics on solving the world's marine plastic pollution. Also, it is very meaningful to introduce Korea's marine debris monitoring as a replicable model today. I'm Sunuk Hong at our Sea of East Asia Network, Ocean. Korea National Marine Debris Monitoring is a very rare project compared to other monitoring projects in the world because it generates basic government policy data through citizen science collected by trained citizens. So, next slide, please. To help you understand my presentation, I would like to give you a summary slide first. The beach debris monitoring that I will introduce today has been conducted for 14 years from 2008, and it is still being carried out today. Prior to 2008, monitoring was being conducted as a government research project for 4 years from 2000 to 2003, and I was lucky enough to be involved in this project. As a result, we learned early on that South Korea's beaches have a high percentage of plastic, but it wasn't clear what specifically should be reduced. In other words, we knew that plastic was a problem, but we didn't know what kind of plastic should be reduced as a priority. And as you can see, this is what we called the pre-phase. So based on our experience, my colleague and I designed a collection of 100 items of debris found on Korean beaches to be monitored and persuade the government to launch this monitoring program. From the results of the first 2 years, we found that South Korea's debris was more from sea-based sources than land-based ones. This was very different from the usual estimate of 80% of debris coming from land-based activities. Green indicates sea-based sources, red is land-based, and purple denotes debris from abroad. As you can see, the initial trend is still maintained. Upon learning this, we realized that the first plastic we need to reduce is expanded polystyrene buoys, which are usually used in oyster and lobster farms. So, since learning this information, the Korean government is working to reduce it. In the second stage, the methodology of the first stage was reorganized to clarify the distinction between materials and sources, and the method was improved with a focus on plastics. Along the way, better monitoring of beach debris and ongoing quality control efforts have enabled citizen scientists to produce quality data. So from now on, I will introduce details. Next slide, please. The objectives of the program are to produce in situ data on quantities, source, and composition for management and policy, to initialize active response among neighboring countries, and to enhance cooperation between government and civil societies. The program is managed by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and COEM, which is a semi-governmental agency, executes the program. Surveys are conducted by citizen groups with a managing organization that liaises with COEM and civic groups. And it is the managing organization's responsibility to manage data quality, data collection, analysis, and report results. This management role is carried out by my organization, Ocean. Next slide, please. The survey started off with 20 sites nationwide with 2-month intervals, and the number of survey sites increased to 40 until last year. And starting this year, there are 60 sites. Monitoring efforts are done in the same position on the same beach. 100 meters is surveyed for items larger than 2.5 centimeters. And debris is removed after the survey. In other words, it can be said that the accumulation rate is surveyed. So for an average of 2 hours, an average of 7.5 surveyors participate in one survey. Next slide, please. In order to know the quantity of debris coming from neighboring countries, the number and weight of foreign debris is measured using the information written on labels or on the surface of individual items. This chart shows the result of the marine debris source identification using Whiting's scoring system, published in 1998. The main sources of beach debris were fisheries and aquaculture related activities. And as you can see, it's the one in dark blue. Its proportion has decreased over the past 10 years. Household waste in red have increased along with beach recreation sources in light green and recreational fishing sources in dark brown and purple also show a similar increasing trend. On the other hand, foreign debris was not an important issue. It was found that we should primarily focus on reducing domestic sources first. Next slide, please. To manage the quality of data, training workshops are held 1 to 3 times a year. Paid experts visit survey sites to guide surveyors and check whether the numbers recorded on the data card match the photos and values entered in the online database system. The results analysis report is submitted to the government every year and it is open to the public. These monitoring data provide the most basic statistics on marine debris in Korea, and the National Assembly, the government, the media, and researchers use these data a lot. Next slide, please. Overall, the accumulation rate of beach debris in phase 1 was significantly decreasing in terms of number and weight. However, the proportion of plastics has not decreased, so we needed more information about plastic. Next slide, please. Styrofoam buoys, EPS buoys for aquaculture were the most abundant item in monitoring. They comprised of 13% of the total in number at first. In fact, styrofoam buoys EPS buoys were always the most abundant item in monitoring results until 2012. This is why we were able to understand that aquaculture should be a top priority in marine debris management for Korea. Since 2009, there were a lot of governmental interventions to drastically reduce EPS buoys. Governmental interventions include supporting the substitution for high-density styrofoam buoys, but it is still styrofoam. The second, establishing the national marine management plan with priority. The third, supporting durable alternative buoys. Fourth, institutionalizing fishermen's mandatory retrieval and prohibiting new EPS buoy installation from next year. Next slide, please. Would you click one? Next slide. Okay. The left side of this slide shows the policy development process that my research team took on to reduce EPS. And click again. Yeah. On the right side is governmental policies that followed. I think my research team has made a significant contribution to publicizing the seriousness of this problem and urging measures to be taken by government. Next slide, please. There were a few lessons we've learned from the phase 1. Reliable surveys were conducted for 10 years because there were rare changes in site location, surveyors, and regular surveys. We found a clear decreasing trend, especially in aquaculture origin debris, which had been the most abundant items in domestic debris. This is a model case for cooperation between government and NPOs. Focusing on aquaculture industry rendered improved results. More efforts to cooperate with neighboring countries are necessary because marine debris are transboundary.
Dr. San Wong,
Yes. Yes.
5 minutes left. Sorry.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Categories should be amended and plastic-focused monitoring is needed. Macro, meso, and microplastic surveys can be harmonized in terms of classification for further study. So the second stage of monitoring started in 2018. Next slide, please. In the second phase, plastic was subdivided into categories such as fiber, foamed, hard plastic, etc. that could be compared to microplastic surveys. Adding fragments to individual subtypes of plastics made it easier to find items that are more likely to break down into microplastics. Non-plastic ones were simplified. We can provide data per linear meter and also per square meter. Next slide, please. The number of litter seems to have increased significantly in 2018 and 2019. The weight increase wasn't as significant. Would you click the slide? It is like that the recent typhoons that affected Korea were so powerful that the number of brittle items such as styrofoam buoys affected the number. Next slide, please. So the line graph shows the number of EPS buoys, which increased suddenly in 2018. And by plastic type, as you can see, foamed fragments, EPS fragments increased significantly compared to hard plastics or film plastics. Okay. Please be back. Severe weather conditions and climate change seems to affect the distribution of marine litter. What nature does inevitable, but it is possible to prevent the use of fragile plastics such as styrofoam buoys. Next slide, please. Monitoring in Korea has been mentioned as one of the best practices in the COPSI report, and it will soon be introduced in an APEC report. In addition, the Korean government is looking beyond its neighboring countries by expanding its cooperation with many other countries that share the Pacific Ocean. And as an example, Indonesia is conducting a pilot monitoring method similar to that of Korea because of the cooperative efforts between the two countries. Also, cooperative activities between PEMC and NGOs in Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam will be actively carried out starting next year. So on the last slide, next slide, please. On the last slide, I want to ask you, why do we want to monitor marine debris? For the most part, most monitoring objectives will be one or two of the objectives listed here. If you want to evaluate the effectiveness of policy measures by assessing the cost, quantity, composition, type over time, based on citizen science, please consider collaborating with us because we are confident that the Korean National Marine Debris Monitoring Program will be the most suitable monitoring method for this objective. Next slide, please. And click again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Hong. Now we move to the next speaker, Dr. Edwin Lineses from the La Salle University, Philippines. Please, Dr. Edwin, the time is yours. Dr. Edwin, you still mute? Dr. Edwin? Dr. Edwin, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Edwin, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Dr. Edwin, we can't hear you.
Please check the microphone, please, Dr. Edwin.
If you're using a headset, please remove it and use your laptop mic.
Dr. Edwin, can you remove your headset? Maybe it works if you remove your headset. Yeah. Dr. Edwin? Yeah, can you remove your headset? Okay. Still, we can't hear you.
Yeah. So I think am I good now? Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Now you are good now.
I think
Okay.
there's a problem with my speaker. So
Yeah, please,
this
Dr. Edwin. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I hope that you are seeing the slide right at this very moment. Can you flash the first screen first, please? Okay. So I will be talking about community understanding in the process of monitoring pollution initiatives in Cavite. Next slide, please. Just to run through quickly about what you will be hearing at this point of time, I will just be talking about the problem of plastic waste, as well as the plastic pollution initiatives from the vantage points of the communities in the Philippines, particularly in Cavite province. Next slide, please. Our study is actually a mixed method, and we have identified several communities and sites, in particular, actually 5 of them, based on the parameters set by Palinkas et al. That we have considered, for example, areas that are construed as critical, as typical, as heterogeneous, or probably as extreme. So what you're seeing in the slides are 5 areas in 5 cities and municipalities in the province of Cavite, particularly Kawit, Bacoor, Imus, Dasmariñas, and Silang. So these are typically our sites. And next slide, please. What we were looking for, I think that's the old slide. But anyway, what we are supposed to be seeing is the picture of the community. And from model terms, our communities are mostly female, 71% of them. They were married and belonging to an age group 35 to 44 with a mean age of 42. Most of them are actually graduates of high school with an average size of household of 5 who own their house, majority of them at about 62.3%, and living in the area for an average of 22 years. So as far as employment is concerned, many of them, or most of them, 85% are actually employed, and they were employed in vending or even in construction work, whose average monthly income is around 10,500. Next slide, please. The thing that I would be looking after, as far as this community is concerned, is that they admitted the use of plastic. Actually, if you look at the left part, they use plastics often, which means that at the very least they're using plastics in whatever form at least 2 to 6 times a week, with roughly a quarter of them telling that they are using plastic almost every day. So definitely there's a problem as far as these communities are concerned, because they are mostly reliant on the use of plastics almost every day of their life. When we also ask about the source of plastic, roughly 213 of them, this is multiple response out of 300, admitted that they are getting plastics and the packaging of in plastics from a sundry or sari-sari stores, and others are from the market. Next slide, please. Another striking about this community is that I think this is also typical, not just in Cavite, but in all other parts of the country, the thing that we call the culture of tingi. So I think you are familiar with the retail. So basically in the country or in Cavite, many, if not all of the communities are really resorting to retail industries or buying little stuff instead of buying things in bulk. What you're seeing, for instance, in the picture is a typical sundry store or sari-sari stores in the Philippines. And normally, people would opt for a sachet. Okay, one, because they're able to try several variants. Second, they are thinking that they can only afford products that are sold in sachet, particularly since most of them are on bi-monthly, weekly basis in earnings. Another thing is that they opted for tingi simply because they are seeing that this tingi is offered in a right concentration or volume. For example, what you're seeing in the picture is a juice. So typically, they would rather have one sachet, because one sachet would be exact for 1 liter of water, so it won't go stale. So to cut the long story short, communities are really using sachet, and this is very typical, not just in Cavite, but actually in the country. So the next question would be, what gets thrown usually? So we're already familiar that the Philippines or communities in Cavite are really used to this sachet culture in general. So what gets thrown? And based on the study, many of the things that were thrown were from noodle packaging, from plastic sando bags, a lot of them from coffee and from milk, and all other possible products which are packaged in plastics. So these are usually being thrown either in landfills or through the river. Another thing that the study would also that also finds out is that among the 300 respondents that we have, only 114 of them really have an answer as to what were the initiatives that they knew in their communities. So apparently, this is only just a third of the population. So many of them do not know what exactly is being done at their community level as far as addressing plastic waste pollution is concerned. And out of 114, for example, this is also striking, that they have only, 92% of them only found out, by the way, next slide, please. I forgot. 92% of them have found out, next slide still, 92% of them have found out that they only knew of river cleanup, what people knew. Yeah, that's correct. They only knew of river cleanup among any other else. Even if we have talked to several provincial, municipal, and city environment natural resource office, and there are a lot of initiatives that are being done to somehow address this plastic waste pollution. But apparently, majority, 9 out of 10 people in the communities can only think of cleanup drive, which is a sad reality. Another thing, though, is that if you look at what people knew, they admittedly say that they somehow recognize the hazards that it will bring, plastics will bring to them, because they will destroy the seas and the ocean and somehow will be affecting their health. And another thing that I also would want to highlight based on this finding is that they are somehow aware that they are part of the reason why there are plastic waste problems, but they are also willing to somehow shell out if and only if they really find out a ways to be able to help the community in addressing plastic waste pollution. Next slide, please. What do people think about plastic pollution? Well, I will just be highlighting few things. When we ask this to the communities, apparently they can only pinpoint few. And again, clean up or river clean up is the only thing, is one of the things, sorry. And then they also thought of recycling and the regular and proper waste collection. So apparently there is a discontinuity between what let's say the government is doing through the MENRO and the SENRO and the PGNRO, and what people really can think of in trying to address plastic waste pollution. Next slide, please. As far as the laws in the province is concerned, there are actually a lot of laws. No? For one, and primary law that is provided in the province is this Provincial Ordinance 007/2012. So as early as 2012, there was actually a move coming from the provincial government to somehow ban plastic and the use and instead use eco bag, in the province of Cavite. And there are several cities and municipal ordinances and resolutions that seek to somehow address this or somehow respond to this. But apparently, there might be some problem as to the implementation, because it seems that these laws are just there, but they are not religiously implemented because of several reasons. And one of those is definitely the deficiency of an alternative to a packaging that are normally used or distributed in the communities. Next slide, please. So here's the summary. If you look at the understanding of community in the province of Cavite, people in the community are aware of their role, and they're also willing to participate. So this is a good thing about it. No? Second thing is that the sachet culture is still present. There are so many sundry stores or sari-sari stores. So we can think of it as the producers really understanding the community. This is the reason why they sold many of their products in sachet. Third, the community are only just aware of cleanup drives. That's a sad reality. And they can only pinpoint of regular and proper waste collection as the most important measure to somehow address plastic waste pollution. This is different from what, for example, local government officials have been telling us, that there might be another way. And those another way, however, are just centered on recycling, or in a way just giving plastic a second life as one of the best initiatives that could be done to somehow address this looming problem in the river. Last but certainly not the least is that there are laws in place. But again, apparently, there is a problem as to the implementation of these laws. And the government tends to be more lenient about this. Next slide, please. So here are the things that we probably can take away from community understanding. So I think if you look at the study and what we have found out, it's equally important that IEC campaigns should be heightened. So why are we saying this? Because if you look at the data that we have shown earlier, apparently people are not aware of the things that are happening. Apparently people are not familiar with the many things that can be done aside from just the idea of cleanup drive, or probably just the idea that it should just be thrown elsewhere in dump site. So I think this should be one of the things, in response to understanding communities, that there has to be massive campaigns for these communities to really find out, to really know that there is more to what they just knew and they thought at this point of time. Second, there's also the possibility that these people, because they are aware of the potential hazards of these plastics and what it can bring to the Imus River, they are also expressing willingness to participate. In fact, part of their difficulty is just to find out how to be involved. So I think this is one of the things that particularly the local government should also look into. Third is the enabling law. The Philippines already has RA 9003, or the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, as early as 2000. But apparently, what it lacks maybe is an enabling law, particularly on extended producers' responsibility. Well, good to know that Senator Villar, for example, one of the senators here in the country, are proposing to somehow really put EPR on the provision of the law, because this is the way to somehow address the problem from the root and not just on the level of the communities. Part of that is the idea of alternative packaging. So this is something we cannot really deny the fact that Filipinos are really into tingi or sachet culture. So we can't do anything about that. So what we can do, however, is maybe come up with an alternative for a packaging still in retail, so that we will never be able to contribute to additional use of plastic packaging that would eventually create problems in our river or our water systems. Last but certainly not the least, stringent implementation. So we do recognize this. In the Philippines, we have good country, we have good laws, we have good ordinances, we have good policies. But apparently, laws and policies are one thing, implementation is another thing. And this is probably where we can improve. The idea that no one should be exempt, no? That the idea that there should be no impunity, that everyone should be meted out with sanction if and only if everyone or anyone is found out to be violating the provisions of the law. So I think in all of those things, the idea of monitoring plastics, because the provincial government, for instance, has that. They have a checklist of the prohibited things and the best practices, and they make a checklist to somehow monitor how the laws, how the implementation of plastic ban in the province is concerned. But without stringent implementation, then probably those would just be part of the statistics as one of the good things that probably we cannot max out. Last slide, please. So to cut the long story short, there is more to, let's say, the plastics and the idea of plastics. And we have to understand where the community is coming from, so that in the initiatives that we will be doing in the next or probably in the future, we will take into account how communities understand in such a way that we would be able to monitor plastic waste pollution and leakage to the river in the province of Cavite. Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin, for excellent presentation. Before we move to the discussion, we have a 5-minute breaks. Please grab your coffee and back on time in 5 minutes, and we will start the discussion. Look forward for the discussion. Yeah, we come back to the discussion. I saw in the chat box there's several questions, but already answered by panelists or the speaker. Based on the previous speakers that mentioned on Indonesia, like Philippines, about the ASEAN project related to the plastic pollution, but also there's two organizations related to in Korea and Hong Kong related to marine debris, littering, especially in the ocean, and the beach littering. And also we discuss all topics related to marine plastic pollution monitoring, and we agree that marine plastic monitoring is important. I would like to have one question for Dr. Marian Olsen. Dr. Marian Olsen, hope you are still here. How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect our plastic pollution scenario? Can you say something about this for the future scenario or the future outlook, please, Dr. Marian Olsen?
Yes, hi, Arisman. Could you just repeat? I'm going to look for the question myself, maybe.
No, it's a burning question from me.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
how did the COVID-19 pandemic affect our plastic pollution scenario? Because now many increasing of, like Indonesia, increasing of plastic face shield, mask, all the medical waste as well. So I think it's increasing due to COVID. So what you can say about the future outlook of this plastic pollution related to COVID-19? Maybe that's my question. Okay.
Yes, so we don't have any specific numbers for Southeast Asia, but I think we all can understand that, of course, there has been an increasing number of items astray following the COVID. And as you already mentioned, Arisman, this is due to all the medical waste that is related to COVID. And also another aspect that is, so it's not all, it is certainly the amount of items astray, but it's not only that, it's also about the resources that has been available for actually managing the waste, and the priorities for actually doing waste management and having attention to waste management in a situation where resources, I'm talking about both human resources as well as economic resources, has been sort of directed towards dealing with the pandemic. So obviously there are several factors that has influenced on our priorities and also on the waste, the amount of waste during the pandemic. So as I said, from the ASEAN project in specific, there hasn't been any particular studies related to that, but actually our institute, the Norwegian Institute of Water Research, did a desktop study from India looking into the challenges related to COVID and how this has influenced the amount of waste, as I said, the waste management, and also problems related to the informal sector and the waste pickers and health issues linked to that. So the question that you are raising, Arisman, is quite complex, and there are a lot of different effects coming from the COVID, not only on the waste amount.
Okay,
so no clear answer, but this just reflecting a bit about the problems around this.
Yeah. I also would like to raise this question to all the panelists, especially since the plastic become a protector for COVID, and then in the same time also polluter. So I would like to have a views from Dr. Hidayat, and then next Gary, San Hong, and Edwin. I would like to start with Dr. Hidayat first. What is your comment on this statement? Please, Dr. Hidayat.
Yes, if I want to repeat again the question. It's about the COVID effect of this plastic problem.
Because
yes.
at the same time we need plastic for protector for our safety, right? All the medical people and also the people who travel need a face shield or mask. Increasing the on some studies also increasing of protector personal protector equipment PPE in several river. What is your comment?
Yes, thank you, Parisman. Yes, I agree that good plastic is very good, and we keep our health and also keep our food become last longer, and it's protect things to be before it's used. But yeah, the bad plastic is that if it leaks to the environment, it's become a problem. So that actually, yes. Sorry, yeah. The problem is in management. This the mismanaged plastic is become a problem. So the solution, I think, is in management, that we have to have a better management of plastic waste, especially and for the medical waste. Have to be concerned on people and also the environment. That's from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hidayat. And now, how about Gary? Please, Gary, the time is yours. You have a comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I've well, obviously, with us being in Hong Kong, we were closest to Wuhan. We were the first sort of coastal region, which is why we were the first to sort of raise the alarm bell about the plastic masks on the beach. And since then, we've had over 10,000 news articles. So we've been talking about this now for the last year and a half. But it's not just about the masks. I mean, obviously, the masks have become the new straw, this sort of poster child. You know, everybody was talking about straws before. Now it's the masks. I mean, the contribution they make to the total plastic debris is minuscule, but obviously it's all extra debris. But when it comes to the whole COVID plastic use, you know, obviously we've seen in Hong Kong, if you wanted to come here, which you couldn't unless you're a resident, you've got 3 weeks in quarantine in a hotel, 21 days. And in the hotel bill, you get your 3 meals. Your 3 meals are all in single-use plastic for 3 weeks, whether you like it or not, and they get sent to landfill. So then we look at everybody was staying at home, don't go out. It was all order online, get your food delivered. So the increase in food packaging that has been, you know, just overwhelming our waste management systems. That's obviously another big factor with COVID. So there's been some good positives with COVID, and there are obviously some negatives. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Yeah, I agree with you. The increasing of online shopping, yeah, especially you buy a food delivery and then there's a lot of packaging inside. Okay, now Dr. Hong, what is your perspective? Maybe your experience from Korea, also dealing with COVID, and then the issue of COVID related to plastic pollution is increasing or decreasing, or yeah, please.
Yes, in our data result, we can see the increase of single-use plastics such as plastic bags, food packages, and plastic bottles, etc. But the medical waste is not a big problem along the beach. I think it is quite well managed. The reason of plastic increase in our data, I think there are 3. One is the Ministry of Environment's policies were suspended to overcome this urgent situation, like stop using single-use plastic cups and in the cafeteria and coffee shops. And the second reason is there is a lot of campers to enjoy their own space along the coastline, and then they discard the cup, the single-use plastics. And the third one is the same, like Mr. Gary said, delivery food is really increased, so it affects our marine environment. So our government decided to deal with COVID from this month. So I should insist the Ministry of Environment should take the original policies back.
Thank you, Dr. Hong. Now we move to Dr. Edwin. You mentioned about the important not only from the community side, but also from the producer side, like EPR, because we understand that plastic packaging is increasing due to COVID. So please, what is your views on this? Please, Dr. Edwin.
It's really right, and this is somehow the same as what Gary and Sunny was saying earlier, that indeed the pandemic really has affected the generation of plastic waste in the country. And let me take it from two sources. One is from the very words of our provincial governor, PG Enro. She's actually here in this forum. In one of our interviews, she actually told us that starting 2020, that the start of the pandemic, there was really a rise or an increase in the use of plastics coming from those food deliveries, because those are very common these days. So that's similar to what Sunny and Gary was saying. Second was the data. We got this in 2020 as well, a case study in chemical and environmental engineering that says that the country, the Philippines as a country, uses actually 49 million face masks every day. And this definitely contributed to the waste, which often ended in the bottom of our seas and our beautiful beaches in the country, which is a sad reality. So to cut the long story short, we have been adversely affected by the pandemic as far as plastic waste pollution is concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Edwin. Now I would like to call Dr. Rachel Hurley to wrap up this first session. Please, Dr. Rachel, the time is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks to all the organisers and all the speakers for an excellent and engaging workshop. I'll be attempting to draw from the different topics addressed in the presentation so far today, and we'll aim to bring these together under the umbrella of adapting variations in plastic pollution monitoring to national or local circumstances. I guess the slides are now just loading. Okay, so to the first slide, next slide, please. Thank you. The marine environment has received the most attention in regard to plastic pollution, with a track record of research and monitoring efforts to define the status of the problem and solutions to resolve the contamination and its potential effects. This has been paired with efforts to both develop and coordinate a suite of methods to monitor plastic pollution in different marine settings. This draws upon long-standing expertise from marine sciences and includes methods such as visual observation, the use of surface or bycatch nets, unmanned aerial vehicles such as drones, or remote sensing techniques. Several national, regional and global working groups have addressed and continue to address marine plastic pollution, and they have made significant progress in coordinating monitoring methods and pushing towards harmonisation of data collection and reporting. Many of these methods can be applied across the global oceans, yet whilst efforts have been made to develop, optimise, refine methods for marine monitoring, work is needed to better capture and account for local and national variabilities. This includes establishing a comprehensive assessment of what each method actually measures, so that we can effectively interpret the data that is produced. It's important to understand the geographical area or the period of time that is captured in the monitoring, and to define the spatial and temporal scale of data points. We must continue to work towards a goal of harmonizing data collection and reporting to facilitate comparability between different studies that are conducted. And this should also address differences in, for example, the ocean dynamics or other environmental processes, with specific reference to processes operating on a local or national scale. And finally, we need to identify ways to validate measurements that are taken through marine monitoring to ensure high data quality. Next slide, please. So moving towards the coastline, beach surveys are very often used to monitor marine plastic pollution. These surveys typically follow standardized methods for sampling and reporting data, which have emerged from the combined efforts of researchers and stakeholders and through the work of international organizations and working groups. Current methods typically utilize a transect or quadrat approach to characterize plastic pollution within a defined spatial extent of the beach in question. Efforts should continue to ensure that the standard forms of data collection remain fit for purpose and that they're capable of capturing, for example, the dominant or locally specific sources of plastic pollution, as well as pointing towards some of the important processes that lead to the accumulation or transport of plastic pollution in the coastal zone. These represent aspects that are critical to understanding plastic pollution at the local or national scale. It's also important to assess the need for adaptability in methods to assess plastic pollution in different coastal environments, such as by accounting for different morphologies, the different shapes of the beaches or coastlines, or to understand specific coastal dynamics or the different activities that might release plastic, for example. Next slide. So now let's move upstream and spend a little time discussing riverine environments. We've heard from some of the speakers today about the need to better understand the role of rivers in releasing plastic to the oceans. This is not necessarily as simple as we might hope, and this is embedded in the complexities that are associated with developing methods for monitoring rivers globally. Rivers are dynamic and complex environments that vary significantly across the globe. There is no single representative river environment that we can use to develop methods. Even within the ASEAN region, the way that rivers look can vary widely. From steep vegetated valleys with rivers that might stop flowing, for example, during the dry season, to very wide channels that are often used for shipping and navigation. Along these rivers, we can expect that there are many points at which plastic is released into the channel, and that these different sources are likely to vary across both time and space, which makes them harder to identify or characterize or quantify these different sources. Research has so far indicated that plastic becomes trapped or stranded many times on its journey towards the river mouth. Once plastic enters the river, we don't really know that much about how it moves, but what we can say is that rivers can't really be seen as acting as very smooth pipelines, delivering plastic very efficiently to the ocean. It's a lot more complex than that. And it's important to address all of these knowns, as rivers represent a crucial component in curbing global marine plastic pollution by helping us to turn off the sources. Next slide. It is the physical geography of rivers that introduces a key challenge to developing standardized or harmonized methods for plastic pollution. The wide variety in, for example, the shape of the river, its depth, the speed of the water flow, the structure of the riverbanks, the plants growing in and along the river, the sediments that are transported in the river or are found in the riverbeds, or the way in which the human populations have modified or transformed the structure, the shape of the river. These are all aspects that affect the way in which plastic moves and is accumulated in different parts of a river. A key challenge is in identifying a method that can capture and account for all of this variability. What's more, the geographical context should be retained in the method, as this represents an important component for interpreting the data that is produced. To give some examples of this, I'll now talk through 3 different approaches that are used to monitor riverine pollution and describe the ways in which the geographical context can affect the applicability or the suitability of each method. Next slide. So first, I will talk about observation-based techniques. These represent the most commonly utilized techniques for assessing riverine macroplastic flows. If you click, if you just click, yeah, thank you. So this can be performed using human analysts or through the use of cameras or drones to observe the surface of the water and count and characterize the plastic pollution that's flowing. If you click again. Thank you. Some important considerations when using this technique includes the availability of bridges or other structures that pass over the river from which to conduct this monitoring. So visual observation with human analysts will require the presence of this type of infrastructure so that you can access the whole river width and easily view the plastic that's flowing beneath. Sites without this form of infrastructure might be unsuitable for this method. And the characteristics of the infrastructure are also important. A bridge shouldn't be too high, for example, as you need to be able to clearly identify the plastic pollution below. It should also be safe and accessible for undertaking the monitoring. And visibility is also important. This can relate to the clarity of the water, so how cloudy the water is, how deep we can see into the water, which can affect how much plastic can be seen along the surface of the water. But visibility also refers to, for example, the effect of sun glare, which can make spotting plastic items difficult, particularly at certain times of the day. In some rivers, the amount of plastic in the river or the speed at which it is moving may be too great to be able to count and characterize all of the litter. This imposes a threshold above which this method can no longer provide accurate data. So it might be that during flood conditions, observation-based techniques are not capable of capturing how much plastic is passing through the river because the flow rate and the amount of plastic challenges the ability to spot and count all of the particles. Finally, this method is only capable of measuring floating litter. So you're only able to count and characterize what you can see from your vantage points, what you can see with your drone. If a river mostly transports litter below the surface, so in a non-floating component, for example, due to high density plastics being dominant in that catchment, then this method may substantially underestimate plastic pollution at this site. Next slide. So next I'll talk about the use of nets. If you click again, these can be deployed from a bridge or an anchored boat and can be used to physically intercept and collect plastic litter that's transported by the river. And you can then retrieve these nets to count and categorize all of the plastic litter that's being collected. If you click again, as with the observation techniques, infrastructure is also important here. You need a bridge or you need to be able to access a boat in order to use this technique. And again, the infrastructure should be able to facilitate safe deployments. If the plastic load in the river is too high or the flow velocity is too high, this might overwhelm nets, which can clog or tear under pressure. You can also address this by selecting the appropriate size of the net or the mesh that is used, but this introduces challenges when harmonizing between different studies that use different types of nets, different shapes of nets, for example. And finally, particularly in deep or wide rivers, the nets can be used to monitor different parts of the river cross-section, depending on where they're deployed. And the local context will be significant here, especially in determining how well a single net measurement can represent the sampling site. Next slide. So the final example I'll give is the use of trash racks or booms. If you click again. If you can, yeah, thank you. And again. If you can click again. Yep. So these represent permanent or temporary structures that are placed across the river to trap plastic waste, and they're often used as a form of cleanup activity. Yet these devices are not suitable for all rivers. The amount of plastic and the flow conditions will determine whether they can be safely placed into a channel. As they clog with litter, these structures will affect the hydrology and it can increase the local water levels and potentially exacerbate flooding. So careful consideration of the local context is essential before using this sort of technique for plastic litter collection. If they can be used, the design of these devices will affect what part of the total riverine plastic load is captured and can be measured. This includes the size of the screen or the meshes, or the location in the river cross-section where they're set up. The amount of plastic in the river will influence the rate at which these structures will need to be cleared. And if they clog, their capacity to capture litter will reduce, and they no longer represent useful monitoring methods. So it's very important to consider the local context in these examples. Next slide. So these methods will capture what is actively moving in the river channel. But I already mentioned that plastic might not always be actively transported in the channel and might be trapped in different places and for different amounts of time. We need additional methods to capture the magnitude of these processes in different regions. Important aspects are likely to include the types and amount of vegetation in and around the river and the morphology of the river and riverbank. We've already heard about approaches used to characterize riverbank plastic pollution, but further work is needed to help adapt this method to different types of rivers globally and compare how this trend varies in different parts of the world. This is especially important as different zones of accumulation in the river might be capable of trapping litter over medium to long-term timescales. And so, even if we can switch off all of the sources to the river, we might see a legacy pollution from these different zones. We can target the cleanup efforts to reduce this in some rivers, but we need to better understand where and how this trapping takes place. Next slide. Another very important aspect is the variability in the characteristics of plastic pollution across different scales. Studies have revealed that different environments typically have a unique footprint with regard to the amount and the type of plastic litter. This relates to the different local and national sources of plastic, which can differ due to different plastic pollution, consumption and disposal systems, habits and behaviours. It might also be due to the net result of different freight and transport processes, which govern how plastic moves and accumulates across time and space. Methods to monitor plastic pollution and efforts to standardise and harmonise data collection should be able to capture this local variability. For example, standard data collection forms should be adaptable to be able to document local specific sources of plastic litter. This represents crucial information for effectively tailoring management and mitigation efforts to the specific locality or country. Whilst global trends can provide some useful insights, the geographical context is essential to make meaningful reductions in plastic pollution across a range of spatial and temporal scales. Next slide. To help establish this geographical context, we need to carefully select sampling sites. We need to consider what methods can be safely deployed to accurately assess plastic pollution across a well-defined spatial or temporal extent. And we need to evaluate the suitability of a sampling site in terms of representing plastic pollution in the area. We need to think about how we collect and report plastic data and the approaches that we can take locally, nationally, and internationally to harmonise this process. From this, I can wrap up my presentation by highlighting some of the important questions that remain. Next slide. Okay, if you click again. So further research and open dialogue with all stakeholders are required to help answer questions about the data that we collect and what it really shows. We need to understand what each method is capable of measuring and how different sampling sites can affect the suitability or the accuracy of different methods. We can do this by taking steps to validate monitoring measurements and to working towards harmonisation. If you click again. There are still many parts of the picture that is still missing, and we need to find methods that can assess plastic pollution, both in the parts of the global environment that have not yet been measured, as well as in capturing important processes such as extreme flood events, which are expected to be very important for the movement and redistribution of plastic. We also need to continue to unpick the spatial and temporal dynamics of plastic pollution at local and national scales to help develop and refine effective mitigation strategies. And click again. Finally, we need to discuss how the data will be used to ensure that the data collection is fit for purpose and that it generates information that accurately and effectively addresses the specific objective. This might include different ways of expressing the data that's produced, and the geographical context remains essential in interpreting data outputs. Harmonisation of methods and data collection represents an essential step to facilitate comparability between studies and to better understand variability at local and national scales to develop appropriate strategies that can help effectively reduce plastic pollution globally. And on to the final slide. Okay, I would just like to thank you very much for your attention and wish you a very pleasant rest of the workshop.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. Now we have a second session. We would like to explore a regional or global mechanism for marine plastic pollution monitoring. We have two speakers. We start with Mr. Almerindo Oliveira da Silva, National Project Coordinator for Timor-Leste, UNDP, Jeff Arafura, and Timor Sea Ecosystem Approach Phase 2 at Sea. Please, Mr. Almerindo da Silva, your time. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, and evening here in Timor. This now is evening. Yeah, Your Excellencies, distinguished the speakers and participants. Thank you very much for this webinar. It's very grateful and wonderful here to invite me as speakers in this occasion. So please go to the slide. Yeah, the first one. Yeah. Okay. So as you notice, the title of this is Understanding the State of Marine Litters in the Arafura Timosio ATS region and Setting Response Action. Please. Slide. Yeah. You know that's the Arafura and Timosi's Ecosystem Action Phase 2 is start from 2019 to 2024. It is the is Jeff financed by UNDP supported ATSI program. Will open the foundation realized that's the first phase from 2009 to 2014. You know that we work for 4 countries in the region. It is the Timor-Leste, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Papua New Guinea and Australia as well. So we have 4 main here is overexploitation of marine resource, loss of or degradation of habitats and biodiversity, land and marine pollution, marine-based pollution, climate change. So next slide, please. Yeah, as you know, that's based on the Doctors in Association 2021 is the program, the from regional marine and land-based pollution is a region-wide concern. Whale concern is the 2 things here, whale spilled, and mostly is the highlighted the red marine litters, including plastic and derelict fishing gears like a net or plastic floating, fishing plastic floating. So that's we have localized pollution concern is we have 3 points here is nutrients, animal manures and stewards, and sedimentation from the local mining activities, and toxic substance from agricultural practice. Next slide. Yeah, and then you know that the marine litter is an emerging global issue, which type are significant in ATS regions. So we have 2 points here. That's the first point is floating debris, mostly it's plastic. So we have adverse impact on the artistic value uptake by marine life, and then adverse impact to tourism, fishes, health, marine life as well. So the second one is beside the debris, mostly directly fishing gears, destruction of the benthic environments, cause fishing or enchantment. So adverse impact of fishes, fish resource, marine life as a whole. As you know, that's in the data here is from 2003 to 2008 is increased. Please, next slide. Yeah, as you see, that the first study here is a field study in the Rotendao, Nusa Tenggara, East Nusa Tenggara in province in Indonesia. Is you know that the respondent from the key question here is the 643. From male is 431, and the female is 212. Is mostly is have 2 years well spilled from wellhead platform is most high. And then the marine litters solid waste is as a primary as well as CS2. The result from this survey is in the Rotendao in March 2002 by doctors in 2021. Next. Yeah, here the same places. You know that here we have really two questions. Is based on the one is in the sea level, one in the land. So this based on the response here is sea-based pollution is serious. But the answer yes is 339. That is almost like 40, more than 40% say yes, and then no. 100 is that's high say yes. For the land-based pollution is almost 40% from this yes, say yes. 151% is high. It's means between land and sea-based pollution is serious. That's why I say come up with the key message. That's the sea-based pollution is the more important to coastal residents. The marine debris and oil spills as primary concern. The third one is the high positive awareness on the importance on the marine life. That is the key message we need to highlight here. Please, the next, yeah. And you know, there's we have also do the second field study in Timor-Leste, the south coast of Timor-Leste, with like a household interview survey, and the key information the key information based on the community workshops were conducted in the 4 municipalities, start from August to December 2020, and then till October this year. So we do the transport work in areas indicated by the villages of as a marine litters hotspot. All litter found were collected, classified, counted, and weights. This was the followed with the FCD with coastal communities in 4 municipalities: Fikeke, Manatutu, Manufahi, and Komalima. Next. Yes, we see there's like the number of solid waste items collected during field survey 2020-2021. As you know, here as we get like we have a hotspot. Its total is 14 hotspot. Then we do the transplant is about 60, start from 60 meters to 250 meters. And we have, you know, that's the most meter square is about 5,600. Then total items you get is 626 items in the coastal area. The total weight of the litter found in its hotspot area, as you see here, is we have a 14 hotspot, and the total debris weight is about 54.7 kgs. And in total of the area is about the 4 municipalities, 32 kilometers around. Next, please. As you see here, is like a plastic and fishing gears nets, or nets is from inshore and offshore. Fishing is considered the main source of marine litters collectors. For example, here is a plastic is most high in this survey, and the second is rubber, then fishing gear in that, and then the glass. Next, please. We come up with the conclusion based on this. You know, we have 3 points here. So the ATS, Arafura and Timor Seas region, is highly productive and rich in resource. But however, it is under many threats, and one of them comes from marine litters. The region needs to tackle the problems caused by marine litters, or take the action following the recommended response action following. Next, please. Yes, the recommended response action, it said it's a phase is for regional scale establish a regional monitoring program on marine litter, as the colleagues before. Here, we have a 4 points establish a marine litter survey station at each country for regular monitoring activities by the NGO or local government or the community council. The second one, joint survey guidelines and harmonize the data collection. The third is a joint training on marine litters survey, pitched litters, and then submerged litters. 4, there's a joint public awareness activity. Example is the beach cleanup or campaign, movie screening, or can be as an extracurricular in the curriculum or the education as well. So this following the Korea's example, you can see here is clearly observed decreasing is the trend of marine litters in Korea over the last 10 years. This is just some sample from this. Please, next, please. Yeah, the some activity action response in the field, as you know, the recommendation here is the for local and the national scale as well. The one is develop plans for the prevention and management for the marine litters through the intersectoral coordination incorporated into the ICM, Integrated Coastal Management Plan. And then the second one, improve solid waste management practice or procedures incorporated into the ICM and ecosystem approach to fishery management, EFM plan. Third one is the community marine litter monitoring program, intersectoral community education and public awareness. Then you know that's here is the some activity we did in Timor-Leste in Manatut municipality. So we start to do the training for the women groups, and after the training, they do the practices to do the recycling and then reuse the plastic from the bits to use it as a reuse for the shopping bags. As the Timor-Leste start to have a law for the government, so to decide as zero plastic for this. So I started to do the recycle, reuse the plastic for this. And also we do the like intersectoral coordination to do the monitoring and observe and then give the mandate for the government, for the local government to do this as an local regulation as well. Please, next. Okay, so this the
ocean.
one is
Ooh, I love them. Well, you might already know that our ocean is very important. It's home to all creatures and ecosystems that we rely on for food, livelihoods, and climate regulation. About 50 to 80% of the oxygen production on Earth comes from the ocean. Isn't it cool? But did you know that our ocean now is in crisis? How comes? The answer is marine pollution. Globally, marine pollution combined with climate change threatens the collapse of all marine ecosystems. Plastic. Plastic are the most common form of marine pollution. They come from a variety of land and ocean-based sources, enter the water in many ways, and impact the ocean. Plastic can take anywhere from 20 to 500 years to decompose. As the decade passes, it starts to break up into microplastic. Microplastic is also very dangerous because microplastic will get into the food chain and, yes, the food that we will eat eventually. At the current rates, plastic is expected to outweigh all the fish in the sea by 2050. The ocean needs our help. So, here are some things that you can do to reduce the marine pollution. First, go out, clean it up, and participate. This problem simply will not go away by itself. It's persistent. Second, be wise. Say no to single-use plastic. Third, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce the amount of disposable plastic you use. Cut down anything that you only use once. Reuse disposable plastic when possible. And recycle anything that can be recycled. Ocean plastic is a huge problem that's only going to get worse if we don't want to wake up and change our ways. We can do better for the ocean and for us.
Yep, thank you very much for the participation, and I'm looking forward to get your feedback on that question.
Thank you, Mr. Almerindo da Silva. Now we move to next speaker from WWF, Mr. Hui Ho. He would like to share about EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, and also the new global treaty of plastic pollution. Please, Mr. Hui Ho, the time is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers, ASEANO and PEMSI, for giving WWF the chance to present our presentation on a new global treaty on plastic pollution in today's important webinar. So about WWF, we are one of the world's largest environmental NGOs, and we work to conserve the world's biological diversity, ensure that the use of renewable natural resources is sustainable, and promote the reduction of pollution and wasteful consumption. This, of course, includes addressing the current unsustainable pattern of plastic pollution and waste management at the moment. In this presentation, I will firstly introduce the growing momentum for a new legally binding global agreement to address plastic pollution. This is followed by key findings in WWF recent report on perspectives from Asia and the discussion of implications of such a treaty on monitoring efforts at various scales, such as those that have been covered in previous presentations today. Lastly, I will specify how we may start the process of negotiating this new treaty at the next UN Environment Assembly in 2022 in a manner that can ensure its effectiveness. So let's start by painting a picture of the problem and put it in perspective of just how massive the scale of the plastic pollution crisis really is. We calculated that the amount of solid waste generated globally each year is equivalent to the weight of 523 trillion plastic straws. If we lay these plastic straws lengthwise, they could wrap around our globe for 2.8 million times. And this is only municipal solid plastic waste. It doesn't count the plastic waste that's generated by industries in the industrial waste stream. So it is estimated that around 11 million tons of plastic enter the ocean every year, and this growing amount of plastic is damaging the marine ecosystem, killing a wide range of species and entering in our food chain as well. It is also incurring direct economic cost to which is estimated at around $3 billion every year due to damage to our marine ecosystems. So when we take into account the whole life cycle of plastic, which can last up to hundreds of years after plastic becomes waste, the negative impact of plastic impose costs that are far greater than the market cost. WWF estimation shows that the lifetime cost of the plastic produced in 2019 is $3.7 trillion, 10 times more than its market cost and more than India's GDP. This is only calculations based on quantifiable components for which there is reliable and sufficient research, which means that the real burden that countries are currently bearing from plastic life cycle is even higher. So unless urgent action is taken, problem will progressively get worse over the coming decades. And the transboundary nature of plastic pollution makes the task especially complex as well. The plastic in the world's oceans today has at one point found itself within the jurisdiction of one or many states. Any piece of plastic litter could potentially end up in the ocean or in one country and then reaching the ocean eventually, the risk of leakage makes all plastic pollution a transboundary concern. It makes it tremendously difficult to monitor, to plan effective response, and to fully eliminate without a dedicated global governance structure. So against this background, there is a growing momentum pushing for a new global treaty to tackle marine plastic pollution. It is expected that such a new legally binding global agreement could provide the necessary elements for an effective global response, such as global goals embodying national targets, a dedicated scientific body to harmonize measurements and monitoring, a set of high common standards of action that is universally applicable, and implementation support mechanisms. As of November 2021, we have 128 countries who have publicly called for a new global agreement on marine plastic pollution, while another 26 have agreed to consider the new agreement as a global response option. It is therefore increasingly likely that a decision to start formal negotiations will be taken at the resume section of the 5th UN Environment Assembly, or UNEA 5.2 for short, in February 2022. In this context, WWF had commissioned a study to explore the perspectives from Asia on this new global treaty. And the study covers a selection of 16 countries in the region, seeking to identify common themes and outline the differing views to inform international debate and to ensure that the perspectives and concerns of Asian countries are reflected in the elements of a new global treaty. Over the course of several months, we engaged with government officials from all of these countries, and out of the 16 countries, we received direct responses from 10. Those that are marked in orange here, we didn't receive a direct response from. We then supplement the study with a result from desk research as well, including for the countries that did not respond to our research request. In July, we organized a workshop to discuss the preliminary findings of the study, and also use that discussion to inform the drafting process. So in the report, we find that marine plastic pollution is perceived by most Asian countries as an environmental problem that requires international attention. And despite the solutions that has already been pursued at national and regional level, the report identifies 6 challenges shared by a majority of the countries, amongst which a lack of data along the life cycle of plastic, insufficient monitoring, and gaps in knowledge on marine plastic pollution are predominant. Bhutan and Vietnam, for example, emphasize in their responses that a lack of technical expertise and knowledge about the impact of plastic on ecosystem, society, and the economy. Whereas Singapore highlighted to us the current lack of internationally accepted methodology on monitoring of marine litter, posing challenges to monitoring and data collection. And both the ASEAN Regional Action Plan for Combating Marine Debris and the COPSI Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter recognize these similar shortcomings and the needs for improvement. Furthermore, government officials from different countries also emphasize the need for access to financial resources and technology as a crucial step in addressing plastic waste issues in their respective countries. In terms of support for a new global treaty via different international dialogues and processes, especially during 2021, such as the Ocean Day Plastic Pollution Declaration that was announced in June, and the ministerial statement at the Conference on Marine Litter and Plastic Pollution in September. A total of 9 countries covered in this report have expressed their support for the start of negotiations on a new treaty. So what would such a treaty entail? Our findings comprise discussion in the region on elements especially related to plastic pollution and common elements, often found in most international agreements as well. So, for example, long-term elimination of discharge of litter and microplastic into the ocean as determined by UNEP 3 in 2017, and SDG target 14.1, which calls for the prevention and significant reduction of marine pollution, particularly from land-based activities, are seen by countries as a starting point for formulating global goals and targets. There also seems to be an agreement amongst most countries that the treaty should be comprehensive and adopt a life cycle approach as shared by several government officials and reflected in the ASEAN Regional Action Plan and the COPSI Regional Action Plan. More on these specific elements, the countries further elaborate their expectations. Firstly, a new global treaty was thought to have to establish a framework for harmonizing existing national targets, as already set by some of the countries in Asia regarding the reduction of marine litter and increase of recycling rate. Obligations to prevent plastic pollution should include adoption of national action plans and be informed by the countries in the region who have already adopted such plan. Importantly, obligations should include a phase out of certain plastic, of which the report presents numerous activities that have been kicked off at the national level in the region. Regarding the institution, it is thought that existing regional mechanisms and institutions should be taken into account and incorporated into the new global institution structure. And lastly, the developing countries clearly communicated that a need for capacity building, technology and technical support and sharing of best practices. The global treaty would also need to respond to these needs. As the world is getting ready for a possible start of treaty negotiation next year, the report also recommends actions that countries in the regions may take to contribute to the debate and ensure national and regional interests are represented, such as identifying the challenges and needs to be addressed and formulating and prioritizing their expectations for different elements of the treaty. Due to the limited time that I have here, I won't be present all of the findings and discussions of the report. So I invite all of you to explore the discussions of all of these elements and where the countries stand on the issue in the full report at this link. So now, before we turn to the implications of a new global treaty on monitoring efforts, let's recap briefly how a global agreement on plastic pollution would look like. Generally, the new treaty could comprise of a harmonized set of definitions and standards, a common policy framework, reporting metrics and methodologies, and international capacity building mechanism, including funding to scale initiatives. So the possible results of those would include, for example, evaluation of countries' performance against their commitments, potentially all across the plastic life cycle, tracking of progress towards the overall goals and objective on a global scale, harmonization and standardization of methods and initiative, and the support mechanisms for those. And lastly, a dedicated intergovernmental scientific body on plastic. So what do all of these details mean? They means that they can have implications for the various aspects of plastic pollution monitoring, determining what is being measured by what methods and means of implementation, and importantly, how these monitoring results would be used to inform actions and affect policies on a national, regional, and global scales. So a well-designed...
a minute left.
Okay.
Yeah, please, your time. Yeah.
Okay, so a well-designed and faithfully implemented global agreement could mean consistent, robust, and systemic monitoring across the entire life cycle, which help filling in the current data gaps and allow us to identify better the system failures that result in the plastic pollution crisis. It could also mean that monitoring across the various scales would benefit from harmonized methods and produce data that is comparable and interoperable. So, but this won't happen on its own. What implications the new global agreement have on monitoring efforts is that the answer is it would be determined by how the agreement will be shaped. And to influence this process, Asian countries need to actively engage in international dialogues on this and the potential negotiations starting in 2022. And as they consider and get themselves ready for such tasks, it is important to consider all elements of the agreement as a whole and how well the whole regime is when put together. So WWF recommends 5 success criteria for how to shape such a successful treaty in order to advance those monitoring processes that I have mentioned before. And these, most importantly, we would need to make the new agreement legally binding. So the next immediate step that we recommend is that we need to have a decision to start negotiation of the global agreement. And we recommend all states to hit the global call and expectations and join as co-sponsor of the Peru-Rwanda resolution to start negotiation of this new legally binding global agreement. We also invite civil society and individual citizens to join us in different petitions and platforms to call for the government to start the negotiations next year at the UN Environment Assembly in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ho, for your presentation. Looks like there's no question from participant in the chat box. Maybe I would like to ask one question to Mr. Almerindo da Silva. You still here, Mr. da Silva?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Maybe also if from the previous speakers like Dr. Marian Olsen or others would like to have a comment. I think this topic is quite interesting related to the next United Nations Assembly related to Treaty of Plastic Pollution already presented by WWF. My question is how effective, the regional mechanism related to marine plastic pollution monitoring, because if legally binding, of course, is quite challenging. Its country is very diverse, even like Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and Indonesia is also, you have experience on this maybe from your project, in Arafura and Timor Sea. Maybe we start with Mr. Almerindo da Silva, please. You can respond on this, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's not really response as fix, but is it the discussion about this? It's ongoing. As you know, that's the effective of the regional things is first thing is that's now we won't go in on the names between the region. Start on the national intersectoral committee, and we'll start on that. So on the discussion. So later on we'll find the solutions, find out how can we can work together to address the monitoring between. For example, I can say that like in Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea is a very small of marine litters in there. As a new country, still not have any, like for mostly in Timor-Leste, still not have any high industry in there for the West, and then things about this. But for the future, it is really interesting to make sure to take action now, because we'll have oil spills, and then we'll be coming on the south. They call it Tasimane project. It's a huge project. Will be coming later. So how to have effectiveness coordination for the monitoring between the Indonesia, mostly Indonesia, and Australia. So how between these two countries, big country, we are in the middle, and then PNG is small country as a Timor-Leste. So the most important things is at the regional level. We have really have that's the MOU or regulation between the regional, so we can have support each other, because this is responsibility for all region, not only one country. So we need to have support each other in terms of the industrialization management about when is becoming also the big issue in here, mostly the plastic. But in Timor-Leste, especially, is we have the approval law. The government law is started for the zero plastic. Is start to stop the Chinese people or the people come out from order for the import the plastic materials. That's one. The second one is how to link with Indonesia and Australia, how to start to find the solution to better for the better regulation, and to make sure that in the names or in the SPF and then the regional level, we have the agreed one MOU at the regional level between the G to G, the government to government, to support and then to fortify with the law and regulation by the country, each country. That this should be ongoing. Then not after this we will finalize anything, but after this we will find the solution between. It is most important thing what I can say. It is to take responsibility in the between the country, neighbor country, as a main issue for solving together.
Thank you, Mr. Da Silva. I would like also get a perspective from Norway side, Dr. Marian Olson, maybe continue by Dr. Hong from Korea, from East Asian countries. Please, Dr. Marian Olson first for your views on the global treaty on plastic pollution in the United Nations Assembly next year, in March,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Arisman. First of all, I would say that it's very exciting times that we are actually in, and we have the possibility of now following this treaty from all the negotiations. I hope that we will come to that conclusion, that there will be negotiations, and a lot of things are of course not yet known to any of us, but I think that obviously some kind of monitoring and reporting will have to be a part of a treaty, but I would like to sort of widen up the perspective, because I think even though environmental monitoring, that tells us something about the situation, the burden, but I think that a treaty can also very well actually be aiming at a larger perspective, addressing the value chain, and monitoring should, always sort of be linked to what kind of results that we want to have. And if you think about mitigation, various kind of mitigations, monitoring should be coordinated, or they should be designed so that they actually give us some kind of information of the results of the mitigation that will follow from a global treaty. So monitoring in that perspective can be actually at different points of the value chain. So it's not only on the environmental monitoring side that we will have to prepare and build capacity. We also should look into how we can provide data and information that tells us something about the effects of mitigation, also further, let's call it upstreams in the value chain. So that's a perspective that I also think is worth keeping in mind when we now sort of prepare for the treaty. That, what kind of data can tell us something about the success of a treaty? What kind of monitoring can tell us something about the success? That's some preliminary thoughts that I have. Obviously, environmental monitoring, but also it can have, for example, mass balance and national inventories of plastic use, waste management production and waste management solutions, and how much is being sorted, how much is astray. Those kind of information also need we need in monitoring also to provide these kind of information.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Marian Olsen. It's very clear. Monitoring should be the treaty, and also the data is important for mitigation. Dr. Hong from Korea, maybe you would like to add, you have perspective on this, please.
There's a lot of things I want to say, but I used to focus on beach shoreline marine debris monitoring today, but the monitoring can be applied to very different compartments of environment and or socioeconomic parameters as well. So in terms of new treaty, probably statistical data form to collect the waste management or discarding rate or leakage to the ocean, plastic leakage to the ocean. The kind of information can be more likely combined using the same data reporting template. It will be a little bit easier than harmonize the actual beach debris or floating debris survey monitoring. So that will be the one way to consider about for preparing the new treaty. But for evaluating some treaties' success or failure, we need to very well established data, quality data. To maintain that high quality data, we have to put a lot of energy. So this it can be limited to spread to the global societies. But for the East Asian, Southeast Asian countries, I think the Mr. Jerry Stokes presented the very smart way to monitor, like 7 specific items as indicators along the coastline can be easily detected from the image, and then quantitatively estimate by computer program. That will be one easy way to approach for the Southeast Asian countries.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hong. I think we agree that we need a high quality of data, and then we need a harmonization of method of monitoring for plastic pollution. And then I think, like mentioned by Da Silva, we have to work together to address marine plastic pollution, because it's a very complicated issues from the industry side, mentioned from the previous speaker about EPR, and as well as from the unmanaged waste, infrastructure, and other issues. So I think we cannot stop here to discuss. We will discuss further, but due to the time limitation, I would like to call to deliver the closing remarks, Ms. Annabelle Kayapiap from Provincial Government, Cavite Province, Philippines. Please, Ms. Annabelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to participate in this webinar that presents the various tools available in the fight against marine litter. My closing remarks will not be the usual closing where I attempt to summarize what we've heard from the various presenters. Rather, I will offer my response as a local government unit who are critical actors in the fight against marine litter. A complex problem which is linked to climate change and biodiversity conservation, fisheries and water supply management, which are actually anchored to the PEMC ICM framework on sustainable development. The province of Cavite has a total population of 4.3 million based on 2020 population census, and we have 6 major rivers directly draining into the Manila Bay. In terms of solid waste, we were able to develop our 10-year solid waste management plan and already submitted to the Environmental Management Bureau of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Region 4A for review and approval. The total per capita generation per day of solid waste in the province is around 1,435.29 metric tons per day. These were divided according to biodegradables, around 44%, recyclables, 24%, residuals both with potential for diversion and outright for disposal, about 30%, and special waste, 2%. In terms of addressing this solid waste, the provincial government passed an ordinance number 007-2012 banning certain uses of plastics, especially sandbags. Likewise, the municipalities and cities was mandated to close their open dump sites and establish their barangay and municipal material recovery facilities in compliance to Republic Act 9003. Other residual waste was collected by accredited transporters and disposed into a sanitary landfill outside the province. Even though there were several initiatives, we are still facing challenges, specifically on the disposal system. We are pleased to be part of this regional project of Asiano. We benefit from the partnership with PEMC, CCs, NIVA, and local universities to ensure that our policies and programs are based and informed by science. The project has been beset with challenges from the start, with natural disasters like volcanic eruption, typhoons, and COVID-19. Nonetheless, today, we have been able to listen to one of the results of the socioeconomic assessment conducted in a sample of communities along the Imus River Basin. We shall soon start a study engaging the food and beverage industry and their challenges on plastic, and information, education, and dissemination of the results of the study. Next year, we aim to develop a practical local government unit handbook on managing plastic pollution. Practical participative monitoring tools like what we have heard so far from various speakers are helpful, not only to my office, but also to the local communities and other agencies working to help manage solid waste and plastics. We learn as we act on the problem, and we intend to document them for broader dissemination. What we have learned from the experience in managing our solid waste in the province falls under the 3 aspects. Number 1 is attitude. The main issue here is not the solid waste per se, but the attitude of the individual in the generation and management of solid waste, because they think it's the sole responsibility of the government to collect and dispose their waste and do not want to participate in the process. Number 2, science-based approach. Policies and programs on solid waste management should be based on science. And 3, facility. Because we have lots of policies and ordinances, but at the end of the day, the province doesn't have any centralized or clustered facility for this 30% residual waste. In the combat on solving the issue on solid waste, we need to first understand specifically the plastic and the circular economy to be able to determine the proper action and intervention of the government in managing solid waste. Currently, our office was able to conduct the junk shop survey in 2020, but a continuation survey is currently ongoing for plastic circulatory audit. This is also to identify some actors like the aggregators and the specific disposal area if it is outside the province, and to produce spatial data and maps. The preparation for the proposed waste analysis and characterization study, or WACS, to update the 2016 WACS of the local government unit is currently on the preparation stage for its first quarter implementation. Again, thanks to PEMC for the support for helping the province of Cavite. There is no magic solution to the issue. The problem of plastic pollution is manifested and needs everyone's cooperation for government, business, national NGOs, coastal communities, especially in finding alternative options to plastics and others. But that is for another conversation. For now, based on our experience in Cavite, we feel that it is important to always start with needs assessment through inclusive local consultations so as to ensure a proper diagnostics of the issue and eventually ownership and buy-in on the program. Learning about good practices from Indonesia and other places are also welcome and important because they demonstrate how it is done. It is a shame that we cannot as yet travel, but we are always happy to welcome you in Cavite to show you our programs, projects, and opportunities to work together, not only on marine pollution, but in general, sustainable coastal and marine development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Annabelle. I think today we get a clear understanding how the importance of monitoring in plastic pollution in the region, in Southeast Asia or East Asia, but also need a multi-stakeholders approach involving all stakeholders to combating marine plastic pollution. And also important is how to bridging the science to policy to have a science-based solution. Personally, I would like to invite also next month our project ASEANO have a event, ASEAN Symposium with ASEAN Secretariat. You are all here, participants most welcome. And then before we end of this program, I would like to remind all the participants to fill the feedback form from the organizer. Again, thank you for productive discussion. Look forward for the next event. Thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.